Yeah, Jim, I was just reflecting back when you and I were in the Explorer Post 717 in North Dallas, and Dad was the Explorer Post leader. Each summer we had one kind of major activity that was a major, beyond just being a camping trip. It was something really special. I know in 1964 we went up to the Pecos Wilderness and went hiking up at Church's Peak. You remember?
I was not on that trip.
Oh, okay. Well, I remember it because Dad was a big help getting me up the mountain along with Hal Pettigrew. But in 1965, there was significant planning to take an excursion down to Copper Canyon.
Also called the Barranca del Cobre Canyon.
Barranca del Cobre in the summer of 1965. I think it was around July. Well, let's say it was July. So not the whole post and not the entire post went on the trip, but a significant number of us went journeying. I think the adults that I remembered, there was Dad and Mr. Bob Nichols, who was
With
the
World
president
Samplers.
of the World Samplers, and he had a fellow along that was a professional photographer, and Mom and the Hoffmans went down, but they didn't go to the canyon. They went on down to Las Mochas. They rode the train down to Las Mochas, and with an intention then of
On the
meeting
West
us
Coast.
on the West Coast, so that when we came back at the top of the canyon, they were going to meet us, and we were all going to
And have a
go.
separate car for
Yeah,
us.
yeah,
and then-
exactly. Anyway, we set out from Dallas and had a car caravan, drove down as far as San Angelo and spent the night at, I think it was an Air Force base. I mean, that was typical, whether it was scouts or explorers, to get welcomed and stay in a dorm, or a barrack actually, on the way down. Arrived down in Presidio in the afternoon, pretty hot down there in the Big Bend area.
Right on the border.
Right on the border. And then made our way across the border to, and I'm not sure how you pronounce it, Owanawa or Ojinawa. Anyway,
Yes.
that's where the train picked up, and so that was the first part of the journey in order to get to the canyon. We caught the train there late afternoon, and
We went to Chihuahua first.
it went through Chihuahua, but we didn't get off there. We rode on to Divisadero, which is where we got off at 6 a.m. in the morning.
That's right.
That's right.
On the rim of the canyon?
And well, not quite on the rim of the canyon. So they had this flatbed truck, and so we probably had a couple of trucks, and we had our packs and all our gear, camping gear.
And it was cold.
And it was cold because it was still dark, and it was fairly high altitude up in I guess it's in the Rockies as they go through Mexico. That's basically, we were in the mountains, so it was pretty cool. And we rode out to the edge of the canyon on the back of this truck, and all huddled up together, and arrived on the edge of the canyon probably just about the time sun was coming up. And that was kind of the beginning of the adventure from that standpoint. I know from my own perspective, I was the trip medic, so I carried a bag of stuff, including simple things: aspirin, tourniquets, snake bite kit, because there was some talk about poison snakes, halazone tablets, and
Water purifier?
and yeah, for water purification. Dysentery tablets, in case you got dysentery, there was something to help along with that. So basic stuff. But I remember thinking before the trip that I was a little worried about the coming on to poison snakes, because I was reading up on the landscape and quite rugged territory. But as it turned out, I don't think I saw one snake on the trip. But anyway, that was in my mind as I'm standing there on the edge of the canyon. And but we all got our packs on our back and head off down the trail, and in a deep canyon, because a beautiful setting. If you look at some of the pictures of the Barranca de Cobra, it's just gorgeous from lip of the canyon. And but the canyon itself, to get down the bottom, it's actually deeper than the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, I've heard that it was, at that time, we were hearing that it was like twice as deep as the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
That sounds like a little bit of
Maybe a little bit of
exaggeration, but it was
exaggeration,
supposed
yeah.
to be deeper.
But it took us a better part of the day to hike down. I would say from early morning, and we didn't arrive down where, say, the bottom of the canyon where the river ran through, and was pretty much, it was like dinner time in the evening. And I think, everybody made it down okay. But I remember Dad really had troubles after that first day of the hike. His back was really bothering him. And I think he probably wasn't the only one that all of a sudden recognized this is a much rougher terrain than what we probably had anticipated. So the conversation shifted. Instead of us hiking through the bottom of the canyon with all our gear on our backs, so could we get some assistance? And maybe that's a good place for you to pick up.
That's what I remember, was hearing the conversation between Nichols and Dad and some other men, that it was going to cost 20 cents per day per donkey and 20 cents per day per Indian to help us with our backpacks. That's what I recall hearing the conversation.
The Indian tribe there is the
Tarahumara Indians are
Yeah.
supposed to be the most primitive Indians in North America.
Okay.
And we woke up the next morning and wow, there were Indians sitting, squatting everywhere, and they're sitting around in their little breech cloths. Some of them were barefoot, their feet looked like leather, and some of them had like cutting of like a car tire.
Sandals cut out of car tires.
Yeah, and strapped onto their ankles.
Yeah.
And I remember these guys with these backpacks, and we saw one Indian that had two backpacks tied together.
Mhm.
He was all bent over, but they were willing to help us.
Yeah, which was a lifesaver, because just knowing the terrain in the bottom of the canyon, there was some boulders the size of houses.
Yes.
Right? And there was not always easy access to just walk along by next to the
It
river.
seemed like we swam through
Yeah,
part of it.
part of it. There was no,
Uh-huh.
the steep walls, and all of a sudden you find yourself, there was nothing but water, unless you wanted to climb way back up. You'd have to go through the water to get.
Do you remember all that dehydrated food?
Yeah, we took.
When they fixed it, they tried to
Yeah.
offer some to the Indians. It was so rich, they could not eat it. They're not used to our food. What they were eating was fish. And I remember them tying a stick of dynamite to a rock. They'd throw it in, and 2 or 3 Indians, 4 Indians would jump in after it.
The
The
kids
fish
would
would
jump
come
in.
floating up to the
Yeah.
top.
That's one way to go fishing. Yeah. and one of,
Illegal in Texas.
One of the young boys that was along, though, he stayed with us.
Julio.
Yes, and he seemed to be, I think, really attached to our group. And
He was Dad's shadow.
Yeah, he absolutely was.
I remember him bringing firewood for our fire, that little
Mhm.
boy. But what, you think he was maybe,
I think 10, 11
10
years
years, yeah,
old, something like that. Yeah, no, he was always close at hand. And the fish that when the dynamite would go off were not much bigger than 5-6 inches. And they would lay them out on the rock and dry them and dehydrate them and salt them. And I think that was kind of like a beef jerky snack or something for them.
do you remember the foot race?
The
They
foot
put
race.
together?
No, but tell me about it.
The apparently the Tahoe Maori Indians had been in the Olympics many years ago for distance running, for like the marathon.
Mm-hmm.
And they lived in caves along the edge of the canyon, and they had their crops and their schools up above. So they're used to running up and down mountains. So they set up a foot race. It seemed to me it was about 50 yards on the sand next to the river at the bottom of the canyon.
Mm-hmm.
And we were all paired up, and the Indian that I was paired up with was 48 years old. I was 16, and I was running track in high school.
Yeah, and you were
And
cross
so-
country.
So
track, I remember.
cross country, and had run a marathon and run these races. Well, I paired up with this 48-year-old Tahoe Maori Indian, and he was ahead of me until he tripped and fell, and I beat him.
And then you beat him. Do you remember some of the other explorers that were along for the trip? I remember for sure Doug and Carter Brown were there. And who were some of the others?
Johnny Doster.
Johnny Doster, yeah.
Yeah, I remember a good story about Johnny toward the end of it, you know. But we had a list of that was with, and it was. Did you read how many scouts there were?
I'm thinking we had probably 16 or 18
16.
plus.
Yeah, that's what I thought about.
Something in that range.
16.
I remember Bob Farrell, Leonard Hoffman. You mentioned Johnny, Ricky Lauderdale.
Ricky Lauderdale. Yeah, I picture
and
him well.
Flat Top, and Hal Pettigrew. You mentioned.
Yeah.
was on that trip. Yeah. So and then Julio was our mascot. So we had a pretty good group, but a manageable group on the track.
At one point, we went into a cave that was a little store that was stocked apparently by the missionaries, and I bought a little brass lantern
Mm-hmm.
about 8 inches tall that was hand made, looked like it had been beat with a hammer and everything, that the top it actually would twist off, and they put magnesium or potassium rock?
Probably potassium or something
Yeah,
in there
or
to.
put a little rock in there, crush it up a little bit, and you'd add some water, and it would
Mhm.
put a vapor off. The top would twist on, and they had a little hand-hammered shield on the top of it with holes in it that when you light this, it'd be like a little lantern.
Yeah, cool.
And that's it was quite a treasure.
Yeah, the other purchase I remember, and it was right after we arrived down, there was this old silver mine, depleted silver mine there, right where we had landed, or as we climbed down in the canyon on the floor. And Mr. Nichols negotiated for a little, it was about the size of a gumball.
Yeah,
It was silver, solid silver ball.
I remember that.
That he picked up, and of course, he had a big smile on his face because he felt like a really good deal, but I'm sure the person on the other side felt like they even got a better deal.
well, they both did.
Yeah, they probably did, yeah. But the natives, or the Taumaharians, are, as you remarked, very, very remarkable people, very durable in terms of their ability to live in that kind of environment. And the other thing I found interesting, it's just little things that stick in mind when we were in the truck riding out the canyon, is I'm sure all the trucks look somewhat alike, but they had put colored tape on the steering wheel that was different colors of tape, and maybe that's the way they personalize the vehicle.
Real festive.
Otherwise,
huh?
yeah, so it's just something different. Was there anything else about the, I think, I remember not so much seeing wildlife, but I remember coming on an orchid at one point. I think Doug Brown found a really beautiful orchid growing, and there's lots of cactus, obviously, in that regard.
Very harsh environment.
But it was pretty harsh environment, lots of rock and
We had
scrub.
heard that this was an unmapped region.
Yeah,
of the Bronco del Cobra, and it seemed like we did tried to do some compass
Well,
work.
maybe we did, but I'm not sure we thought about that after
It didn't
several
show up in
days.
his books.
No,
right?
no. And there was one point, there was a bridge that had been built down low on the
yeah.
canyon, but it was totally, all that was left was the suspension cables.
Somebody was trying to say
Yeah.
that was built by Pancho Villa.
Well, I don't know who it was built by, but it wasn't that, you couldn't get across it, obviously, at that point. But the, probably the most exciting part of the trip was as we were trying to leave the canyon. As after trekking through the canyon, I don't know, we were down 5-6 days in the bottom of the canyon, and then we were going to climb back up. And
To meet
it
the
was-
train with
to
our
meet the
mothers
train
on
in
it and our
Creole
family.
and yeah, meet the Hoffmans, meet Mom, and I don't know if anybody else was gonna meet us, but we didn't quite make it per schedule.
Yeah.
They arrived and we weren't there. And so they went on to Chihuahua and were waiting for us. But as we were coming out of the canyon, there was quite a bit of a challenge for people.
We had seemed like we had run out of fresh water
Yeah.
and food at that point.
I
Didn't
know,
we?
I had just the canteen on me, and I know my canteen was empty before I got out, so I had no more water. And the group that we got spread out, so the group I was with, we ended up sleeping, and didn't sleep actually, on the side of the mountain, because it got dark, and we were still climbing out. We had no fire, no water, no food,
Mhm.
but we were just kind of sitting there waiting for daytime. To finish climbing out. And I think...
Yeah, that was I remember it was like a flat area that everybody was pitching we slept outdoors, obviously, under the
Yeah.
stars,
Yeah.
and we knew it was going to be cold that night, so.
Yeah.
But there were Doug Brown, myself,
Mhm.
and could have been Hal Pettigrew.
Okay.
Not sure who the third scout was, the explorer was, but we started hiking up. They'd asked us to hike up and to find the railroad.
Yeah.
And the three of us started hiking up and up and up, and it was starting to get dark. And when we got to the top, the three of us, it split off two different
Two
directions.
different ways.
So we talked about it, and the other two fellows went up to the left. I went to the right. I remember hiking by myself, just on the faith of God, I knew everything was going to be fine. I hiked along, and I came across a young Tarahumara
Mm-hmm.
Indian girl about my age. She wouldn't look at me, she wouldn't talk to me, she had like a bonnet thing on, and she went on her way, and then I come across a goat herder that had some goats, and he had his hand all bandaged up, and it was blood soaked, and I didn't understand what had happened, but I couldn't communicate with him obviously either.
Mm-hmm.
So I kept going up and up and up, and had some moonlight so I could see, and I come across the railroad tracks. And for some reason, I just knew to go left. It just felt natural to me. So I started hiking on the railroad tracks, and I came across, it looked like igloo-shaped Indian huts, adobe type huts. And there was these Indians around, and just through sign language, I let them know that I wasn't alone. There were more of us down the mountain. And these Indians took me into one of the huts, and there was a mother and a father and a little boy, and this hut had a hole in the roof. They had a piece of steel over some rocks with a fire going under it. And the mother made up, I suppose they were doing it in the other huts also, but made up a bunch of flour tortillas.
Mhm.
And I remember that little boy he was rolling up homemade, looked like bubble gum. And when we came out of the hut, the other Indians, they got several Indians with poles on their back with goat skins, carrying water and food, I suppose the flour tortillas, and we headed back down the mountain and eventually came across the rest of our explorer post, and they had fires built around the campsite to keep everybody warm.
Mm.
And that's the best recollection I have of what transpired. But I do remember that Dad said on the TV program that they did some homemade stretchers, so I don't recall what that was about, where you take a blanket and you fold it over between two poles.
The only thing I can relate to the business and perhaps the need for stretchers, Ricky Lauderdale was asthmatic, and as he was coming out of the canyon, he had an asthma attack, and he was hiking with Mr. Nichols and the photographer. So the three of them were together, and I think they were worried whether or not he was going to be able to get out. And so he may have needed some assistance to get up. It was a pretty difficult climb
could have been
coming back out of the canyon.
Do you remember what happened to Johnny Doster?
Oh, yes.
We had run out of food and water, and Johnny Doster was eating out of a can of Nesquik, that chocolate powder, because he was so hungry. And I remember seeing him for a couple of months in school because our lips were so chapped that he had a big brown ring around his mouth.
Around his mouth. Yes, that was remarkable.
Yeah.
I think we were all changed by the experience. What I know for myself, I lost 25 pounds walking through the canyon. And I didn't have that much weight to lose in the first place.
None of us did.
So, but when we arrived on the train back to Chihuahua and got off the train, Mom and the Hoffmans were there to meet us. She didn't hardly recognize me because it was just like skin and bones, that I lost so much weight. But I didn't sense it myself. But I think we all. Use the R&R time in Chihuahua to recover a bit,
I recall being on the train, they had the little short bottles of Coca-Cola. And I think I probably drank 3 of them. They tasted so wonderful after being so dry. And I had a chicken sandwich. They had so much jalapeno in it, I thought my head was getting burned off.
The other thing is we were standing there on the track, or the platform, waiting for the train to take us back to Chihuahua and then back to the U.S. Somebody had a bottle of mezcal. It's kind of like that homemade
with the worm in
it. With the worm in it. And none of the explorers sampled it, but I think Mr. Nichols or somebody had one shot glass full, and it was pretty potent stuff. So
I guess so.
Yeah, I think so. Anyway, it was a remarkable trip. Unfortunately, I think in hindsight it was a bit ambitious. That we probably didn't realize it was quite as rugged as it was. But everybody grew through that experience in terms of having captured the experiences and the photographs and the memories for years to come. And here it is 50 plus years later. It was 53 years later. It still seems vivid in terms of some of those days in the canyon that we shared.
It's too bad we don't still have the 35 millimeter movie that our father had filmed down there. We showed it on a TV show on Channel 8 television in Dallas. And I know Dad and I, possibly one other Scout was on that program, he told me years later that he had loaned that film to someone
Yeah.
and
they ran it through a projector. It
Yeah.
got destroyed,
Did it?
basically.
Okay.
Yeah, it was, unfortunately, that image is no longer with us, but what we remember.
we have
is
some images, don't we?
Yeah, the memories are there. And, you know, it's, I think the chemistry of that Explorer post with Dad as the leader was, like I say, remarkable, and the experiences continued on the next year. I won't go in details about the trip to Cozumel where Mr. Nichols loaned his DC-3 and Dad flew the whole post down to Cozumel.
And landed on a
Yeah.
little strip in the jungle
Yeah.
with monkeys in the trees. And
Anyway, that's a story for another day.
you can't spearfish down there
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah. Anyway, that was fun, Jim.
Oh, that's
I'm
wonderful.
really glad to
Great
share
experience
the
that we'll
times.
always
Okay.
remember.